long before anyone knew his name. He stayed near the back corner at first, drinking slowly, watching different groups as if waiting for the right moment to join someone. Cameras inside the bar showed him drifting from one end of the room to the other, stopping to make small talk, but never staying with any group long. His hands stayed in his pockets most of the night, except when he lifted his glass or rubbed his palms together. When Talia walked in with her coworker around 10 p.m., his eyes shifted toward them immediately. He approached them casually, making a comment about the song playing on the jukebox. The coworker laughed politely but didn't engage much. When she left early to take a phone call outside, Dorian stepped closer to Talia and continued the conversation. From the footage, their interaction looked relaxed, maybe friendly. Talia smiled, nodded, and occasionally looked around the room, unaware that he was watching her with more focus than she realized. He stayed close as she moved around the bar, talking about harmless topics while keeping an eye on the door and the people around them. As the night progressed, he never left her side for long. When she paid her tab close to midnight and headed toward the exit, he followed quietly behind her. She didn't seem alarmed or uncomfortable, just ready to go home after a long day. Their paths had crossed by chance, but his intentions were far clearer than hers. The final hours before the crime were uneventful, and that's what makes them so devastating in hindsight. Talia walked out of Westfield Tavern alone at first, pulling her jacket tight around her shoulders. The air was cool, and the parking lot was nearly empty. A streetlight flickered overhead, casting soft yellow light across the sidewalk. Cameras from a nearby laundromat recorded her adjusting her purse strap, then glancing back as Dorian walked out behind her. She waited for him to catch up, likely assuming their conversation was simply continuing on their way home. They spoke briefly on the sidewalk before turning onto 6th Avenue. Street cameras captured them walking side by side. She stepped ahead of him whenever she looked at her phone. He stayed slightly behind, slowing down whenever a car passed or a pedestrian approached. Nothing about the footage suggested a confrontation. They simply looked like two people ending their night walking toward the same direction. At the intersection near Davis Market, the overhead camera caught them pausing at the crosswalk. She brushed her hair behind her shoulder. He checked the street behind them again, scanning the empty road. By the time they reached Crescent Pines Apartments, Talia was still relaxed. She took out her key fob, pulled the door open, and stepped inside. From the outside view, it appeared to be a calm end to a normal Friday night. But the cameras inside the building captured something far different once the door closed behind them. The lobby camera showed the first hint of danger, though it wouldn't be recognized until investigators reviewed the footage later. Inside the building, Talia pressed the elevator button with her keys in hand, tapping her foot lightly as she waited. Dorian stood to the side, his posture no longer relaxed. His shoulders were squared, and his attention drifted between her and the hallway cameras. When the elevator arrived, they entered. He stood closer than before, not touching her, but not giving her much personal space either. Inside the elevator, he watched the door instead of the floor numbers. The elevator camera didn't capture audio, but his expressions were tense and alert. On the 3rd floor, as the doors opened, Talia stepped out first. She walked at a comfortable pace down the hallway, rummaging in her purse for her keys. Dorian followed, keeping his hands tucked deep into his jacket pockets. As they approached her apartment, the footage captured a moment when she paused, maybe to find the right key. He leaned in slightly, watching her hands. The shift in his posture was clear, less casual, more focused. The hallway was quiet, no neighbors in sight, no movement from the stairwell. She unlocked her door, tucked the keys back into her purse, and pushed the door open. She stepped inside and motioned for him to follow. When the door closed, the approach was complete. Whatever happened next was no longer in view of the cameras. Inside the apartment, investigators later reconstructed the initial moments based on the physical evidence left behind. The living room, normally neat, showed early signs of a disturbance. A small table near the entryway had been pushed aside. A framed photo lay face down on the floor, the glass cracked but not shattered. Talia's shoes were scattered, one near the couch and one near the hallway leading to the bedroom. A half-empty drink she had poured spilled across the counter, dripping down the cabinet doors. A chair in the dining area had been knocked slightly off balance. The evidence suggested that the shift in Dorian's behavior happened almost immediately after they stepped inside. He blocked her path when she tried to walk further into the apartment, cutting her off near the kitchen counter. The first signs of struggle appeared in that area: scratches on the wall, smudges on the countertop, and scattered items she likely reached for in panic. There were no forced entry marks on the door, no signs of another person. The danger she walked into came from the very man she had allowed in seconds earlier. The full sequence of what occurred inside the apartment became clear only after forensic teams examined every part of the space. The struggle moved through the living room, indicated by displaced cushions and a broken lamp on the floor. Talia fought to get away multiple times, leaving defensive marks on Dorian's arms that would be noticed at the time of his arrest. He sexually assaulted her, using overwhelming force. The injuries confirmed she attempted to resist until she was physically overpowered. After the assault, evidence showed he began searching her apartment for valuables. Drawers in her bedroom were open, and rummaged through the jewelry box she kept on her dresser was emptied. Her phone was knocked under the recliner, where it remained until investigators recovered it. At some point during or after the assault, she tried to escape toward the living room door. The marks on the carpet indicated movement and resistance. But he restrained her again, forcing her onto the couch where the final act occurred. The autopsy confirmed that he used a pillow from her couch to suffocate her. There were faint impressions on her face consistent with smothering, and the pillowcase bore fabric fibers aligned with the markings on her skin. Within minutes, she stopped moving, unable to breathe. The apartment grew still again, the signs of struggle the only witness to what took place. After killing her, Dorian spent several minutes walking through the apartment gathering items. He took her phone, a smartwatch, a small amount of cash from her dresser drawer, and a few pieces of jewelry that would fit easily into his pockets. He walked into her bedroom and opened her laundry basket, pulling out a plain gray t-shirt. He took off the shirt he wore at the bar and replaced it with the one from her laundry. The discarded shirt was found later beneath her nightstand. Before leaving, he wiped several surfaces selectively: cabinet handles, parts of the counter, the doorknob to her bedroom. Though he didn't do a thorough job, fingerprints remained in multiple areas he didn't anticipate investigators checking. Hallway footage later showed him closing her apartment door with his shoulder instead of his hands, a detail that stood out during the investigation. He walked at a quick pace until he reached the elevator, then changed course and took the stairwell instead. His steps were heavy and uneven, as if he was both rushing and panicking. When he reached the first floor, he didn't slow down. The lobby camera caught him pushing the front door open so forcefully that it nearly hit the wall. He sprinted into the parking lot, cutting between cars and heading toward the back alley. A traffic camera facing the side street showed him running with his arms tight against his body, holding something under his jacket. He continued until he disappeared behind a closed mechanic shop 2 blocks away. Inside her apartment, the lights remained on. The pillow lay on the floor, and Talia's body remained undiscovered until the next day. By morning, the first signs of concern appeared. Talia was scheduled to be at work at 7 a.m., but she didn't show. One of her co-workers texted her at 7:15, then again at 7:40, thinking maybe she had overslept. The messages showed delivered, but never read. By noon, multiple co-workers tried calling her. Each call went straight to voicemail. Her sister, who lived an hour away, texted her early that afternoon to confirm their weekend plans, but received no response. She assumed Talia was asleep or busy, but by early evening, worry had settled in. A co-worker, leaving her shift around 4 p.m., drove to Crescent Pines to check on her. When she saw Talia's car still in the same parking spot, she called her sister again. They agreed something wasn't right. Talia rarely ignored messages, and she never failed to show up for work without warning. By 4:30 p.m., her sister contacted the police and requested a welfare check. Officers arrived shortly afterward, using a master key from the complex manager to access the unit. The moment the door opened, they understood why she never answered. The apartment was in disarray, and the stillness in the air was unmistakable. They found her in the bedroom, unresponsive, and immediately secured the scene. Detectives were called, and the full investigation began. The question that followed was clear: who was the man in the footage, and where was he now? Officers stepped inside Talia Monroe's apartment late in the afternoon, guided by the complex manager who had already sensed that something was wrong. The moment the door opened, the quiet atmosphere inside felt heavy. The living room lights were still on, illuminating the signs of a struggle. A lamp lay broken on the floor. A photo frame near the entryway had fallen face down. Her shoes were scattered instead of neatly lined up by the door, the way she always kept them. The officers called out her name, but the apartment stayed silent. They moved carefully through the living room, noting the overturned table, the drink spilled on the counter, and the chair pushed askew. They followed the mess into the hallway where the carpet had faint drag marks leading toward the bedroom. Inside the room, everything confirmed this was no medical emergency. Drawers were open, clothes were pulled out, a jewelry box lay empty on the dresser. On the far side of the bed, partially hidden by the frame, they found Talia. She was unresponsive and positioned in a way that immediately suggested foul play. The officers backed out of the room and called for detectives, securing the apartment with crime scene tape. Neighbors began peeking into the hallway, startled by the sudden police presence. The complex manager stood nearby, answering basic questions and trembling as he explained that she never caused trouble and always paid her rent early. When detectives arrived moments later, they entered the apartment with gloved hands and cameras. They walked through each room, documenting the path of the struggle. The broken lamp, the couch cushions moved from their normal arrangement, the pillow on the floor, all told a story even before the autopsy would. They examined the doorknob and saw no signs of forced entry. They opened the laundry basket and found men's clothing tucked between the items, including a dark shirt that didn't belong to Talia. It wasn't the one she wore out the night before. It belonged to the man who left the building hours after she died. In the living room, a detective spotted the hallway camera monitor that replayed the building feeds. She asked the manager to pull up the recordings. They watched the footage from early that morning, eyes widening as they saw Talia and an unidentified man walk down the hallway together toward her unit. Minutes later, the man reappeared alone, wearing different clothes and running out of the building. With that single clip, the case shifted from a welfare check to a homicide investigation. Detectives retraced the route Talia and the man took from the bar to her apartment by collecting footage from nearby businesses. Cameras inside Westfield Tavern showed him watching her closely throughout the night and staying near her, until she left. A laundromat camera captured them walking together under streetlights, and a market camera recorded them waiting at a crosswalk with him standing close behind her. Footage from Crescent Pines showed her unlocking the door and letting him follow her inside at 12:41 a.m. Additional hallway and elevator clips confirmed their movements, and later showed him running out alone at 1:27 a.m., wearing different clothes. Detectives printed still images from the various angles, creating a clear timeline that became central to identifying him and tracking where he went next. Detectives began canvassing the neighborhood, showing the printed still images to businesses, security guards, and people who frequented the area. At the second store they visited, a small discount shop 2 blocks from the bar, the clerk recognized him instantly. He pointed at the photo and said he had seen the man several times that month. He didn't know his name, but he said the man often lingered near a cluster of duplexes behind the store, sometimes sitting on the back steps of one building. Detectives headed there next. 2 residents recognized the man as well. One said he had seen him near a halfway house on the next street over. Another said he'd seen him sleeping in an old sedan behind a boarded-up service station. Detectives went to the halfway house and showed the staff the printed stills. In less than 5 minutes, they identified the man as Dorian Clay. He wasn't a resident, but he slept there occasionally when a bed was available. He had no permanent address and no stable employment. He drifted between odd jobs, temporary stays, and nights spent in his car. With a name confirmed, detectives began checking locations where he might be hiding. They learned he had been seen earlier that week near an old auto shop that had closed almost a year ago. Its parking lot was mostly empty except for a few abandoned vehicles. Patrol units were sent to check the area. Hours after officers first entered Talia's apartment, they spotted him. Behind the old service station, officers found a dented green sedan with mismatched hubcaps. The driver's door was open, and someone was rummaging in the back seat. When he stepped out of the car, the officers saw the same face they'd been studying on camera footage all day. They approached him with caution, ordering him to show his hands. He hesitated, glancing toward the side of the building as if considering escape. Before he could run, 2 officers closed the distance and restrained him. Inside a plastic bag he carried, they found items later confirmed to belong to Talia: a smartwatch, a phone case, a chain necklace, and a few folded bills. When officers looked closer, they saw scratches along his arms and hands, consistent with someone defending themselves during an attack. He was arrested on the spot and transported to the station. While detectives prepared for interrogation, crime scene technicians began processing the items found in his possession. The arrest gave investigators what they needed. Now they had to prove that he was inside Talia's apartment, responsible for her injuries, and the last person who saw her alive. The evidence would make that clear in the next hours. The medical examiner conducted Talia's autopsy early the next morning. Examination confirmed that the cause of death was asphyxiation due to smothering, consistent with the pillow recovered from her living room floor. There were no stab wounds or gunshot injuries. Instead, there were bruises along her arms, wrists, and shoulders that indicated she had tried to resist. Her fingernails contained cellular material, later matched to Dorian's DNA. There were also signs of sexual assault. The evidence gathered provided a genetic match to the samples taken from Dorian after his arrest. These results were conclusive and left no room for doubt. Back at the apartment, forensic technicians dusted for fingerprints and collected fibers. They found Dorian's prints on the dresser drawers, confirming he had searched her belongings. More prints were found on the bedroom door frame in the living room table. The shirt found in her laundry basket bore traces of sweat consistent with someone wearing it that night. Investigators also combed through Talia's phone records after recovering her phone from Dorian's bag. Her final messages, sent to a friend before she left the bar, contained nothing unusual, but the timestamp confirmed that she stopped replying well before her death. The estimated time of death aligned precisely with the period he was inside her apartment. Between the surveillance timeline, the fingerprints, the DNA results, and the stolen property, the case against him was airtight. Everything pointed to one conclusion: the man in the footage killed her. When detectives sat down to question Dorian, he avoided eye contact. He claimed he didn't know who Talia was and had never been inside her apartment. When they showed him the bar footage, he said they talked, but nothing happened. When detectives presented the hallway footage showing him entering her apartment with her, he changed his story again. He insisted she invited him and everything was consensual. Detectives pushed further, revealing the DNA and fingerprint evidence. He said he couldn't explain how it got there. When they mentioned the stolen items in his possession, he said she gave them to him, a claim that contradicted everything investigators had uncovered. As the questions continued, he stopped responding altogether. He crossed his arms, leaned back in the chair, and stared at the table without saying another word. The interrogation ended with no confession, but detectives didn't need one. The physical evidence was stronger than any explanation he could offer. His silence spoke volumes about his involvement. With the interview finished, the case moved to the district attorney's office for prosecution. The trial began months later in a Greenwood courtroom. Prosecutors presented the surveillance timeline, showing Dorian entering the building with Talia and running out alone less than an hour later. They presented the autopsy results confirming asphyxiation, the DNA evidence linking him to the sexual assault, and the stolen items recovered from his bag. The defense argued he panicked and fled because he was afraid of being accused of something he didn't do. They said the encounter was consensual and that he didn't mean for anything to happen. But they had no alternate explanation for the fingerprint evidence, the signs of struggle, or the injuries found on Talia's body. The jury deliberated for a short period before returning a guilty verdict on all major charges. He was convicted of first-degree murder, sexual assault, and robbery. The judge sentenced him to 45 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole only after serving 35 years. He was taken into custody without offering a statement or apology. His only request was for the officers to remove the cameras recording the sentencing. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, and share, and stay tuned for more stories.